Welcome to Let Them See You, the podcast that honors educators, the everyday heroes shaping futures with courage and heart. I'm your host, Sarah Hightower. This is your space to recharge, find joy, and embrace your power. Welcome to episode 5. Come on in, have a seat. Let's get started. First of all, it's called But What About the ELPS? And the ELPS, ELPS, stands for English Language Proficiency Standards. Now, we're not just going to talk about the ELPS. We're talking about language development in general. All students need to develop language. Come close, get real close so you can hear me in your speakers and see me clearly. Everybody, including adults, needs to develop language. Check that out. Why? Because it is a foundational skill for clear communication. We have to be able to clearly communicate with one another so that we can understand one another. We talked about this last week, right? Because it is so important. So let's get down to it. What about the ELPS? We're going to be digging into where they live, what's about to change within them, and how we can help students to develop language as well as each other as adults. So first of all, let me get into this quick chat. I am feeling refreshed, and let me tell you why. I went to my family reunion in San Antonio recently, and we did San Antonio things. The river walk, we looked around in the mall, we ate, we had a good time in the hotel. We were line dancing in there, had some prayer, and just time to understand and reconnect with one another. And it was just fun. If you haven't done a line dance lately, I'm going to need you to get up and move around because there are plenty to choose from to get your body moving and to make you feel great. So go do a line dance if you haven't done one. So besides the family reunion, I also want to talk about the fact that the federal funding came through. Hallelujah. When I tell you that I was concerned for many reasons. First of all, there are so many students that depend on that funding in order to get the support that they need in our schools in Texas. And not to mention the position that I was in as well is funded by Title III. So I want to congratulate everyone that advocated for these funds to be released, everyone that went to the Capitol to advocate for these funds to be released and to advocate for students in their schools, in their classrooms. You are the real MVPs. Everyone out there that was talking about it, that was concerned, that picked up the phone, y'all did that. So well done. Continue to do what? Communicate. Speak your piece. Say what it is that concerns you about the situation, but do so in a way that gets your message across clearly. I cannot say that enough, right? So if you look at the TEA website, which I will share with you all, it says on Monday, July 21st, 2025, USDE, United States Department of Education, released the Title IV Part B Nita M. Lowry 21st Century Community Learning Centers funding to the Texas Education Agency. That was July 21st. And it was like, oh man, they only released that part. Okay, but what about the rest? What about the rest, right? So then it said today, July 25th, 2025, USDE notified TEA that they will begin releasing the remaining federal grant allocations beginning the week of May 28th, 2025. Yay! We did it, y'all. Keep it up. Keep up the great work advocating for our students So Title I, Part C, Migrant Education. Title II, Part A, Supporting Effective Instruction. Title III, Part A, English Language Acquisition. And Title IV, Part A, Student Support and Academic Enrichment. All will receive their funding. Yay! That's what we need. We need to support education. Without education, we can't grow. We need it as a society. They did update the memo on July 28th to include additional information, which basically says if you're receiving these federal funds, you have to adhere to the United States Constitution, Title VI, Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, Title IX of the Texas Education Amendments. There's no discrimination that can be had, things like that. So just making sure that you are still doing what needs to be done with the money. It said that TEA will accept grant funding applications for these programs and start issuing viable NOGAs, and that is notices of grant awards, once the federal awards are received, and will provide more guidance at that time. So the federal government is releasing the funds to the state, and then the state will let everybody know, here you go, here's your money. It's just so exciting, and I'm just so happy and relieved that this occurred. So, well done to the federal government. Thank you for releasing the funds. Moving right along, we have a great guest today for our episode of But What About the ELPS? Somebody that I spoke to a couple of times in passing at different conferences. But I didn't really have a conversation with him long enough to invite him to the podcast. The first time I met him, I didn't have a podcast, so there was nothing to invite him to. But now I do. So at the most recent conference I went to, which was the Title III Symposium in San Antonio, which happened to be just before my family reunion, that worked out. So I just stayed there after the symposium. Voila, then my family came. It was great. But at that symposium, I ran into, once again, Dr. Stephen Fleenor. If you have never met him or heard of him, you're behind. Why? Because he does great research, and he has done a wonderful job teaming up with Tina Beene. She is a co-writer on the book, Teaching Science to English Learners. And that is a text that I used a couple of years ago in order to create and develop professional learning for the district for secondary science teachers. And we took some of those supports out of the book and adjusted them to fit the needs of our district. And teachers had great feedback from everything that was used. So we get to talk to Dr. Stephen Fleenor and learn a little bit more about him. And he's going to tell us how we can support language in the classroom in the most simple way that we can. Most of the time teachers say, or they wonder, it doesn't come out, they wonder, what about the ELPS? How do I know which ones are supposed to be embedded, when, where, how? I can't remember what they all are. I don't know what it says. I don't remember. Where do I even find them, right? Keep in mind that the ELPS are centered around English language proficiency. So they're wrapped with domains in mind. You've got your speaking, reading, writing, and listening, which means comprehension, their ability to understand what they hear. So all of those domains are what is being used to determine if they're proficient in English. Again, we spoke a little bit earlier about the fact that there may be native English speakers that aren't as proficient in English as our emergent bilingual students are required to be in order to be reclassified out of language proficiency programming, ESL or bilingual education. Everyone, if you're an adult, if you had to sit and take the Texas Assessment of Language Proficiency, the Texas English Language Proficiency Assessment System, if you had to take TELPAS, I can almost guarantee that many adults would not get a rating of advanced high in every domain: listening, speaking, reading, and writing. They would not. If you saw what TELPAS looks like, you might think to yourself, oh my goodness, you're right. I don't think I would get advanced high in every domain. It is work. It is challenging if you're a native English speaker. So as educators, we have to prepare our students to be able to show what they can do with language. But in doing so, it's not anything extra. Stephen helps us understand that as you teach and as you embed these practices, it becomes second nature to ensure everyone understands what's being taught. So we're going to get into this interview with Dr. Stephen Fleenor. I'll go ahead and introduce him. We have the special guest here today, Stephen Fleenor, and I'm going to introduce him to you. Stephen Fleenor is a scientist turned educator who is inspired by the principles of sheltered instruction and growth mindset, particularly in the advancement of academic language in content area classrooms. As the Chief Digital Officer of Silence Education, Stephen drives development of language-rich digital resources for content area teachers, including production of instructional technologies and, most notably, the Visual Non-Glossary, where you can find it at www.thevisualnonglossary.com. He's also the author of Teaching Science to English Learners with Tina Beene, my personal favorite. And Stephen also holds a PhD in developmental biology from Oxford University and a master's in school leadership from the University of Incarnate Word. Welcome, Stephen Fleenor.
Thank
Yay!
you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Well, as we get started, I just want to know, you've had a unique journey from developmental biology to classroom instruction. How did you transition? How did that transition shape your passion for supporting English learners, especially through content like science?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I was finishing my PhD, and my career trajectory at that point was to be a lab scientist, a bench scientist. As I was finishing my PhD, I was increasingly interested in having a more direct impact. Doing laboratory science is a very noble profession and it's wonderful, but it doesn't have the same connection to the impact that you can make as teaching does.
Mhm.
And I got really inspired by the idea of being a teacher. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. But by the end of the first week of school, I was totally in love with the job and totally in love with the kids. The school that I was teaching at, I was very honored to be there because I wanted to have an impact specifically on disadvantaged populations.
Mhm.
And the district that I was teaching at has been historically kind of the poster child of inequity in education,
Mhm.
um, because it was one of the early champions of the Robin Hood legislation that brought more equity in education. And so I was really honored to be there. And I could also see that disadvantages manifest most prominently in the classroom in the form of academic language.
Mhm.
And so when I started to attend these trainings, I went to a training about the 7 steps to a language rich interactive classroom. And it's a brilliant way to serve English learners, but more broadly than that, it helps develop academic language for all students. And I realized that's the playing field that gets leveled when all students are able to acquire academic language. So I became really passionate about developing academic language in the science classroom and then later on in all the content areas.
That's super noble because I've noticed the same thing. Growing up, I always wondered, why do some people sound so eloquent and intelligent, and why do some people not sound that way? And so as I've gotten older, become a teacher and educator, you find that, oh, they're using academic language. They're able to
Yeah.
explain what they're discussing using the language of that content. So, as somebody deeply engaged in sheltered instruction, what's your take on why the ELPS, the English Language Proficiency Standards, are so often underutilized or even invisible in content area classrooms?
Well, from my experience working with teachers, as well as my experience when I was a teacher as well, the one thing about the ELPS that's really intimidating and a little bit intractable is the ELPS are process standards. And especially teachers of tested subjects feel a lot of pressure to check the boxes of the standards of the TEKS in order to make sure they're teaching all the what's of their content.
Hmm.
And so the process standards, they're meant to be embedded in every lesson, but oftentimes our laser focus is let me make sure I'm covering the content. And the problem with that is that if all we're worried about is covering the content, then we lose sight of whether or not the content is actually being processed and internalized by our students. There's a lot of ELPs, but they're actually pretty simple. More importantly, if you adopt your instructional practice as a series of routines and structures that you do every single day, then you don't never have to look at your lesson plan and say, which ELPS am I doing today? You
Hmm.
can just know you're doing all of the ELPS and you're meeting all of these standards. But I think that's the key is going from looking at a lesson plan and making sure I'm checking off this standard and this standard and this standard and this TEK and this TEK and this ELP, shifting away from that towards let me do routine practices in my lessons that promote academic language development, and more specifically, they promote mastery of the ELPS.
We know that the ELPS are actually changing soon, and they're going to be geared more toward content areas so that content area teachers can be more specific in their approach of how students can use language to gather the content, to really process the content. And so you've done powerful work to make academic language more accessible. Can you break down how tools like the visual non-glossary help educators embed language instruction more intentionally?
Yeah, absolutely. To anyone who's unfamiliar by the ELPS, and especially anyone who's intimidated by the ELPS, my number one piece of advice is just simplify it in terms of the ELPS domains: reading, speaking, writing, listening, which another way to phrase listening is comprehending.
Hmm.
That's what I really focus on when I work on lessons. And I'm really glad that the revision of the ELPS has a lot more specific breakdown based on what different proficiency levels look like. And more importantly, as you mentioned, how they look different in the different content areas. If we say that we're going to achieve the ELPS or focus on the ELPS by focusing on reading, writing, speaking, and comprehending, then we can use resources like the visual and glossary to make it so that what we're going to achieve in this lesson is we're going to have our students speaking and comprehending in structured conversations using academic vocabulary. And we're going to have students speaking and comprehending in structured conversations about the academic language that they just read.
Hmm.
So we're going to offer them academic reading, but then we're going to have them have structured conversations based on that. And then we're going to also have structured writing opportunities. And the number one piece of advice I always give is make your exit ticket or your closure that structured writing opportunity. One thing that I've brainstormed with teachers a lot is a lot of times the bell at the end of the period in secondary classrooms or the end of the lesson in elementary classrooms, it just happens and nobody knows how it happens. Time just flies and everything's crazy.
Yeah.
And so one piece of advice I've given teachers is set a timer for however long the lesson is supposed to be. If the lesson is supposed to be 50 minutes, set a timer for 45 minutes,
Mm.
5 minutes less. And when that timer goes off, it's the last 5 minutes of class. Everybody is going to sit down and they're going to write out an answer to the guiding question of the lesson. And we're going to have sentence stems with it. We're going to have a word bank with key academic vocabulary. And even better, like the visual non-glossary really aims to promote, is have visuals associated with that vocabulary to have students write out the answer. So that's going to be the end goal of the lesson. And then throughout the lesson, we're going to have lots of conversations
Hmm.
with sentence stems that are focused around vocabulary, where students are going to be practicing using these words in context before and after reading, as well as in other contexts, like when they're watching videos or doing hands-on activities or that kind of thing.
Yeah, so you're really focused on making sure students use all language domains, particularly thinking through how writing can be used to kind of sum it up at the end of the lessons. That's a great idea. And I think the use of a timer would be a great tip to provide to teachers because man, we can get going and lose track really quick. So that's a great tip. So what are some of the other biggest misconceptions you think you might encounter when it comes to language development, particularly in the secondary content classrooms?
I would say the biggest misconception is that content area teachers sometimes think that they need to explicitly teach language structure and linguistics of the new language. And there's also often a misconception that students who are learning the new language, so for example, if I'm a science teacher speaking in English, teaching in English, and I have an English learner student or emergent bilingual student who is at the beginner levels, there's often an assumption that they can make zero bridges or zero connections between their home language and this new language.
Right.
And the reality is that all we really have to do is give students opportunities to engage with the academic language. Having lots of structured conversations with lots of visuals, that is magic. And that's the special sauce. You don't have to deliberately plan out specific elements. You don't have to necessarily make sure you're using past tense or future tense or something like that. You
Hmm.
can just have a lot of these conversations, and the students will naturally, because the input is so comprehensible from
Yeah.
these small conversations and from the visuals, and then the output is so low stress because that's just part of our lesson. We're just having lots of small group conversations. The language acquisition just happens naturally. So I think that's the number one misconception that I would really suggest to teachers to not worry about is learning language is a natural human process if the environment is right. And all we have to do is worry about creating the right environment.
That's that's so huge. I think the thought that oh we have to have a good learning environment and a conducive learning environment to learning language is lost on many, especially secondary educators. They're kind of thinking through the lens of it's about the content. We've got to get the content, the what through to them, and if we don't get the what, then who cares about the how? Well, they're not going to learn and process any of what you're teaching if the environment is wrong. So we've got to
Exactly.
make sure that the environment is right. I completely agree. And from your leadership lens, what strategies have you found to be most effective in helping schools to elevate the ELPS beyond just compliance and into their everyday instruction?
Really great question. It 100% comes down to lesson planning. First and foremost, it comes down to lesson planning, especially when you're talking about PLCs working at the same grade level in the same content area. The number one piece of advice that I give to school leadership as well as to individual PLCs is before you do anything in this lesson, you know that there's this standard, you know that there's this what that you want to teach. Before you plan out anything, plan out the guiding question that's going to be the closure question, that's going to be the exit ticket.
Hmm.
And a great way to think about that question is what is a question that if my student answered this question completely using the correct vocabulary, that student will have demonstrated mastery of the standard, of the what.
Hmm.
So plan out that question first and make that question the goal of the lesson. It's the language objective and it's also the way students are going to show their mastery. Plan out that lesson first and then plan out two or three open-ended guiding questions that will be structured conversations throughout the lesson. And if you have that skeleton in place, then instead of saying, oh, here's the what that I have to teach, what are some activities I can do? What you're saying is, this is what students are going to have to accomplish in the lesson. At the end of the lesson, they're going to have to be able to answer this guiding question in complete sentences. And throughout the lesson, they're going to be able to have these three structured conversations. What can we do to make them prepared for each of those structured conversations and to build them up towards this guiding question? And the answer will be hands-on activities and videos and maybe some lecturing.
Hmm.
But honestly, if you start off with that structure,
Hmm.
then you're making sure the how gets addressed. And honestly, lecturing tends to end up being minimal in that case.
When you start with that end in mind and the end being, what question are we trying to get them to answer and what is the optimal response using academic vocabulary, then everything else kind of falls into place because then you have to ask yourself, how do we get them there? And
Mm-hmm.
that makes it a lot easier. Finally, and I don't want it to be the end of, of our conversation. But if an educator listening today wants to make their classroom more language rich starting tomorrow, but feels overwhelmed, what's one small, impactful step they can take?
Okay, here's my biggest advice. Just make it super simple and think what is one content area vocabulary word you really want your students to learn by the end of the lesson. And make it so that you're going to have several different structured conversation opportunities that involve that word.
Hmm.
And here's a really simple way to plan your lesson. Structured conversation number one is what do you think this word means? Structured conversation number two is how is this word related to something else we've learned, or how is this word different from another word? And structured conversation number three is something like how can we apply this word, or what's a scenario in which if we changed this concept, or if this process was a little bit different, how would that affect things? And actually, there's a lot of question stems like that that in fact are available on the resources page at the Visual and Glossary.
Hmm.
And that's the structure that Visual and Glossary follows, is that there's several structured conversations that have the very similar structure, and they're around a single word. So every lesson in the Visual and Glossary is meant to achieve mastery of a single vocabulary word, 100% proficiency for all students of a single vocabulary word, with a visual anchor of the lesson. And that visual anchor, it can be something from the Visual and Glossary. We put a lot of time in making those beautiful,
Hmm.
or it can be something that you find on the internet that you feel like is a helpful illustration of the word. Or honestly, the advice that I often give is imagine you're standing in front of your class and you say to your class, does anyone know what this word means? And no one raises their hand.
Hmm.
And your administrator is in the back doing an observation, and you're feeling super nervous,
Hmm.
and you realize you need to give them a scaffold fast.
Hmm.
What would you do with an expo marker in 30 seconds to depict this word?
Ooh.
Draw that on the marker board and let that be your anchor of the lesson. And it doesn't have to look beautiful. It just has to have some information in it that helps students navigate that lesson.
When you think about it, um, I have a coworker who has this beautiful ability to make things plain visually. So
Uh-huh.
you may say something or try to explain something, and she just goes up there and starts drawing. And
Uh-huh.
then she looks around and says, like this? And everyone's like, yes, like that. It's an amazing trait and characteristic to have and grow within yourself to be able to break things down enough to where people can use your ladder to grow up to an understanding that they already have. So that's a beautiful way to put it.
It's very much a learnable skill,
Yeah.
and practice improves it dramatically. Meanwhile, your students really appreciate you being real with them and saying, "This is how I'm going to try to depict it," and they'll say, "Oh, miss, that's ugly," and well, whatever. You see that this is a tree, or you see that this is a
Right, right.
whatever it is.
But that vulnerability opens them up to trying themselves. Maybe they start to learn how to depict things in their own words to show what they know. And that makes all the difference too.
And little do they know that during this whole process, of creating this visual and talking to students through it and them saying this part is ugly and this doesn't represent this, they are employing massive amounts of inferencing skills and they're really developing that. And that's the most important thing is let's make them think about what the process is. And that just makes everything 100% more successful. And if you want a content objective, this is really bad advice. Uh, but but
Let's hear it.
if
I
you don't
love
want
that advice.
if you're not sure about what your content objective should be, and you've got to put something, and you're just starting off on the content objective, just start with we're going to learn about this,
Hmm.
and we're going to learn about this word, and then you can expand it from there.
Yeah.
But starting with here you go, students. This is the purpose of the lesson today. We're going to learn about this word. You're going to know this word so well that by the end of the lesson, you're going to answer this question. And you're going to have an answer by the end of this lesson. That's your one job for the lesson.
Yeah.
And they'll be bought in. It'll go great. It'll certainly go better than here's the 15 minutes of lecture that I'm going to do that you're going to have to memorize for the activity after the lecture. Because we just know, especially in terms of learning language, but really even in terms of internalization of learning, period, students do not learn very well by passively listening.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Well, Stephen, you have been a joy. Thank you so much for providing your valuable insight and your expertise on language learning and the way that we are able to acquire academic language through the use of visuals, especially. So, I want to invite you to come back as much as you would like and share with us whatever you would like to share with us. And we so appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Oh, I definitely love to. I really appreciate it.
Thanks. Bye bye.
Bye bye. Thank you.
Well, that was fun. So appreciative to Dr. Stephen Fleenor for coming through and sharing his knowledge and expertise and personality with us so that we can learn a little bit more about how to support language development and language acquisition in our classrooms. I want to also talk about the ELPS as far as where they currently live. So, the ELPS are part of the TEKS, the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills. They live in subchapter B. That means um, at the bottom. They live in a bag. They are actually being revised now, though. They're undergoing some major changes for the better. One of those major changes is that we currently have beginning, intermediate, advanced, and advanced high as the proficiency levels. We are moving to new proficiency levels called pre-production, beginning, intermediate, high intermediate, and advanced, which aligns better with the research around language acquisition. So that's exciting. There is also a change in the way that they're laid out. Instead of being generally centered around the different domains, they're going to be separated by content area: English language arts and reading, mathematics, science, social studies. Each content area teacher will have a section that they can look at after the general ones that is specific to what they teach. Imagine being able to look through your content and say, now how do I ensure that my newcomer student understands what I'm saying when I teach this content? You go straight to, if you're a science teacher, the science section of your new ELPS, and it will help you through how to support listening comprehension in your teaching. Beautiful. Love the new revisions. They're going to be so helpful for students and teachers alike. If you have to plan instruction on any level, these are going to be phenomenal. And I will share the link to the update that was shared from TEA. It's a webinar and they put all the slides there for the public to view. So I'll give it to you so you can see it. Also, just to note what TELPAS looks like we said before, if you saw it, you would be surprised. Students are required to have written responses, short constructed responses to certain things, and they have to include all the elements from the prompt in order to receive all the credit. They have speaking prompts that they have to respond to. Of course, they have to listen to stories and answer questions about them and verbally respond. And they have to read and comprehend what they're reading. So it is quite challenging assessment. And I will put the link to that assessment as well if you would like to just see what it looks like. Again, thank you for joining me this evening. This has been fun. This is what I enjoy, and I thank you for allowing me to do it. Indulge me. Thank you. Please, let's get to the tip of the week. This week's tip of the week: create a clear message and provide opportunities for others to show understanding. You have got to be clear with what it is that you're trying to say and show so that the people who have listened to you and have learned from you can show you that they've got it. If you're not clear, they're not clear. Again, if you're not clear, they're not clear. You have to provide the opportunity for them to show you that they are clear. I'm not just talking to teachers. I'm talking to any and everybody in your everyday life. If you want to express yourself and share your thoughts, you have to give the other person the opportunity to show you that they got your thoughts. You might even have to ask them, now, what did you hear me say? How do you feel about it? It's all about communication. You know how much I love it. Please keep that tip of the week in mind. Thank you so much for joining me this week on But What About the ELPS? Hopefully you learned a little bit more about them. Hopefully Dr. Stephen Fleenor got you over the hump of thinking through how to support language in instruction. And hopefully you rediscover your joy, embrace your true self, and let them see you. See you later. Bye. Thanks for listening to Let Them See You. Until next time, climb with courage, stand in the light, let them see you.